Okay, thank you. I'm Seth Lederman, CEO of Tonix Pharmaceuticals. Thank you all for coming. Uh, we trade on the NASDAQ at TNXP, and I'll be making forward-looking statements, so I refer you to our SEC documents for more complete information about the company. And I'm going to focus today's talk on our recent data on TNX-102 SL for fibromyalgia, which was just announced right before Christmas. And the TNX-102 for fibromyalgia, we're now at the stage where we are preparing the new drug application. We've completed two positive phase 3 trials. We expect to file the NDA in the second half of this year, and it usually takes a year to get a decision. I have so much data to present that I'm not going to talk about the other things going on in the company, but we have a lot of other things going on in the company. I'll just briefly say we have two marketed products, both for acute headache. We have a number of strategic partnerships. We've got a rich pipeline and a lot of internal capabilities. I will say with the drugs that we're marketing, two migraine drugs, we believe we have the capabilities to launch TNX-102 SL for fibromyalgia on our own. But of course, we're also interested in talking to partners. Here's our pipeline, TNX-102 SL. We're ready to file the NDA in fibromyalgia, but we have two other very active programs, one in long COVID and one in acute stress disorder. We have a number of other programs, but I won't go into them right now. So TNX-102 SL is a sublingual, under the tongue formulation of cyclobenzaprine. Cyclobenzaprine is a potent tricyclic. It's chemically similar to amitriptyline, and it's been approved for short-term use, oral short-term use for the treatment of muscle spasm. It was developed by Merck many years ago, but our improved sublingual formulation is not only sublingual, but it is transmucosal. So by the transmucosal effect, it bypasses first-pass hepatic metabolism and results in a more dynamic blood level of cyclobenzaprine relative to an oral formulation where you would have cyclobenzaprine plus a major metabolite. It interacts with these four receptors in the brain. It's an antagonist at all of those receptors, 5-HT2A, alpha-1, H1, and M1. And we have developed it with this formulation for bedtime use. So this is administered once a night at bedtime, once daily at bedtime. Just briefly about fibromyalgia, about 10 million adults in the United States with fibromyalgia. It's known as a chronic pain disorder, and it is regulated by the pain division at FDA. And the primary endpoint for all fibromyalgia studies is pain. There have been 3 drugs approved for fibromyalgia: Lyrica from Pfizer, Cymbalta from Lilly, and Savella from initially Forest, but now is an AbbVie drug. So although there are 3 drugs in the market, the good news is that has established a pretty straightforward path to approval. But obviously, it presents the challenge commercially of having other drugs in the market. But there is a lot of dissatisfaction among fibromyalgia patients with existing therapies. So here's a summary of our program. In December 2020, we completed and announced our first positive phase 3 study. We had a second phase 3 study that missed at the interim, so we discontinued the study early in July of 2021. And then we just announced in December 2023 our second confirmatory phase 3 study. I'll be focusing today on the results of that most recent study, and our next steps, as I said at the outset, are pre-NDA meeting, filing the NDA, and expecting approval. So here's a schematic of the trial. We called it the Resilient trial. In all, there are 33 sites in the U.S., all U.S. sites. We enrolled 457 patients, and it was a 14-week parallel design study, drug versus placebo, where the first 2 weeks patients took 1 tablet or 2.8 milligrams. Then there was a forced titration to 5.6 every night. And people took it every night. And the primary endpoint, as I said, fibromyalgia is known as a pain disorder. And the primary endpoint was, called daily pain. And the p-value was 0.00005. So 4 zeros in front of the 5. So very satisfactory p-value. So in the next couple of slides, I'll go through the primary endpoint shown in a couple of different ways. This is the weekly results of the pain data. The primary endpoint is at week 14. You can see on the far right. On the y-axis is the change in the mean pain score, and on the x-axis is the week of the study. So I think you can see that we separated early and maintained a healthy separation throughout the study. The effect size, the Cohen effect size, was 0.38, which is comparable or better than other studies by, obviously you can't compare studies, by studies of other fibromyalgia drugs. And all of the pre-specified sensitivity analyses were statistically significant at the 0.001 level or less. We also had a rapid onset of action, as I showed you. Even at week 1, there was separation. This figure is called the continuous responder graph. And this is important because this is what's on the label of the existing products. And the best way to look at this is to look at this line here, which is the 30% responders. This is where people had there were 30% or better response. And we had 46% of response on drug versus 27% response on placebo. This other one is the 50% responder line, where we also had a p-value and a very significant separation, almost a doubling, 22.5 versus 13.3. But other fibromyalgia drugs haven't really had activity out here, so that's not. It's very satisfying, but it's not except to say that other drugs haven't done that well. Those are the primary endpoints. Here are the 6 key pre-specified secondary endpoints. And I think as you can see here, we ran the table. And this is the order of the hierarchy in which they were pre-specified. And I'll quickly, in the next 6 slides, to show you how these progressed over the study. Here's PGIC. In all of these, week 14 was the pre-specified key secondary. But I think you can see across the study, 4 times PGIC was calculated. We had very significant improvement. This is the Fibromyalgia Impact Questionnaire Revised, or the FIQR. And there are two domains. The first of the 2 is the symptoms domain. You can see here we separated early and we're separated throughout the study. And then this is the function domain. And in all of the data I'm going to show you, this week 10, this is the primary, the key secondary specified, this week 10 is the only data value I'm going to show you that doesn't have a p-value. Again, that's not part of the waterfall. Promised sleep is important because we believe that the mechanism of action of our drug is improving sleep quality. So it's not a hypnotic, it's not a sedative, and as I said, it's a tricyclic, not a benzo. And you can see here that we had very good improvement in sleep quality. We believe that improving sleep quality happens first, and then call it a trickle-down effect, where restorative sleep improves other aspects of fibromyalgia. And here's PROMIS fatigue. PROMIS fatigue deserves a short shout out, if you will, because PROMIS fatigue is a prominent symptom in long COVID. We had a good effect on PROMIS fatigue in a proof of concept study we did in long COVID. But I should also mention here that while the existing products only really have fibromyalgia pain on the label, there's at least academic work suggesting that Lyrica may have a beneficial effect on sleep, and Cymbalta may have a beneficial effect on fatigue, but none of the other products have a beneficial effect on both. And furthermore, these aren't label claims in other products. I think that these are really differentiating secondary endpoints. And what we like to think about this is showing is that fibromyalgia is considered a pain disorder, and we have as good or better effects on pain than the other products in the market, but we have a broader effect reaching out across the syndrome. So if you like, syndromal effects. And then this is the final key secondary. This is a sleep diary collected at the same time that the primary endpoint pain was collected. And I think you can see that it separated early and remained separated through the study. So in terms of safety and tolerability, it was well tolerated. And the most common side effects were oral cavity adverse events. Remember I mentioned that this is a sublingual drug, and it's specifically designed so that on hitting the mucosal surface under the tongue, it rapidly disintegrates and then dissolves. So there's a large amount of drug that's rapidly available on the surface of the tongue, underneath the tongue. So in this study, we saw about 25% of people who complained about tongue numbness, basically, oral hyposthesia, at least once during the study. Now, that doesn't mean they experienced it frequently during the study, or in fact, most of them experienced it once, and then it kind of falls off twice, three, et cetera. So it's the most common side effect, and we believe this is not treatment limiting, and we just have to call it out as a side effect because it's not part of the treatment effect. When we look at patients that never, in the 98 nights of 14 weeks of trial, that never had this effect, the results that we see are not that different. So we don't think this is an unblinding effect, and we don't think it accounts for the data, but it's also a statement about the drug that this was the most common side effect. If you look at the bottom, systemic side effects, you can see COVID, somnolence, and headache. And somnolence and headache, 3% versus 1.3% in both of those. So this was a well-tolerated medicine. So fibromyalgia is a pretty common pain disorder. It's about 2 to 4% of the US population. Most people estimate about 10 million American adults. It's underdiagnosed relative to its prevalence rate, but the majority of diagnosed people, as many as 85%, get treatment. Polypharmacy is the norm, where people take almost 3 prescription drugs at the same time, and there's a lot of rotation, and there's a lot of prescriptions consequently. So we think that a broadly acting drug, and this is a first-line drug for fibromyalgia, has the potential to decrease some of the polypharmacy and hopefully, reduce some of the rotation. But the rotation is interesting from a commercial standpoint because introducing the drug, since there is rotation through medicines in this population, we think that the uptake of our drug, would be facilitated by that. And there really is an unmet need because there are certain tolerability issues with the existing drugs, and there's actually academic papers, one cited here, about the majority of patients do not respond to or cannot tolerate therapy with the existing drugs. And that's emphasized here that fewer than half the people treated for fibromyalgia receive benefit. So there's a mix of lack of efficacy or poor tolerability, but we think that there's a real need for a new non-addictive, non-opiate analgesic in fibromyalgia care. So the current medicines, I said, have side effects that limit long-term use. People skip doses or discontinue. There are high rates of discontinuation, switching, and augmentation. There's substantial off-label use of narcotic painkillers and prescription sleep aids. And we think that 102 SL is a non-opiate, centrally acting medicine, provides potentially an important therapeutic option. So, as I mentioned before, we do market 2 migraine drugs. They're through our wholly owned subsidiary, Tonix Medicines, which the drugs are Zembrace Symtouch and Tosymra. Zembrace Symtouch is a a sumatriptan auto-injector, and Tosymra is a sumatriptan nasal spray. It's led by an industry veteran, Jim Hunter, who I've worked with for many years and founded a specialty company with called Validus. And we believe Tonix Medicines is capable and well-equipped to launch 102 SL for fibromyalgia. Fibromyalgia prescribing, care, and prescriptions are limited to a relatively concentrated group of specialists. And we believe that we can target these prescribers with a specialty sales force. And there are a lot of changes in the commercial pharmaceuticals market, I'm sure many of you are aware of, including things like specialty pharmacies and other way that drugs are distributed. So it's a very exciting time for us as we now focus on filing the NDA, but also plan for our commercial launch. So to summarize, fibromyalgia is a pain disorder. It is a central pain disorder, meaning that although the patients perceive pain all over their bodies, it's widely believed that fibromyalgia originates in the brain. Although it's considered a pain disorder, it's actually an amplification of all of the sensory modalities. So fibromyalgia patients typically have increased sensitivity to the other senses in addition to touch, to smell, sound, light, and taste. Before I went in the industry, I was a professor at Columbia Medical School, and among other things, a rheumatologist, and I've worked on fibromyalgia for almost 30 years. And one of the analogies for people who aren't familiar with fibromyalgia that I like to use is it's like a broken check engine light, because pain is the body's check engine light. If you experience pain in your foot, it means you should look down at your foot and see if you stepped on a nail or something fell on your foot or if you stubbed your toe. And fibromyalgia is a problem in the system where pain is turned on all over the body, but with no pathology or insult at the place that they're experiencing the pain. So as I mentioned, we've completed 2 positive phase 3 studies. We're preparing the NDA. And we have 2 other near-term indications. We have INDs for several things, but the ones that we're really focused on are long COVID, which is another between 20 million and 30 million American adults. And we believe that about between 50%, between half and 2/3 of them have essentially a condition that's indistinguishable from fibromyalgia. We call it fibromyalgia type long COVID. And we've already done a proof of concept study and got very encouraging data, particularly with fatigue, for example. So in addition to the 10 million patients targeted by fibromyalgia, ultimately we think that this could be expanded to fibromyalgia type long COVID. We're also doing a study that's funded by the Department of Defense on pre-PTSD, what's called acute stress disorder, acute stress reaction. So in addition to the huge market potential of fibromyalgia, we have some other very interesting indications under development. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention and welcome questions from the audience.